2. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mayor Cyril Jefferson convening a special call meeting for the High Point City Council. Present here in our conference room are several members of council. We have everyone present except for council members Tyrone Johnson and Monica Peters. We have a number of items on our agenda that we'll be discussing. And the first item that we have is an update on Washington Street projects. We'll call on our city manager, Tasha Logan Ford, to speak on this item.
Thank you, Mayor. As part of preparing for our upcoming retreat, but also just part of our ongoing orientation process, we are talking about several department projects for Mayor and Council. So today, the first item that we have is for us to talk about our current Washington Street realignment project. This was a 2019 bond project that's currently underway. But it's rare that you often have, as I say, two bites at the apple as it relates to making improvements along this street. When the original streetscape project was done several years ago, there was decorative lighting that was put in place, sidewalks that were put in place, but at that time, we did not underground the utilities. As part of this bond project and realigning the street, we realized that there was an opportunity for us to reconsider that. So as part of the Washington Street update that Trevor is going to give to council, we also wanted to see if there was any interest for council to have staff further investigate what it would take to put utilities underground along that stretch of Washington Street as well. That part of the project is not part of the 2019 bond project, but again, it's an opportunity while we're working there to have council reconsider if this is something you all would like to do. So without further delay, I'll introduce Trevor to the group. And the inside joke of this is we often have Trevor and Tyler that are working on these projects together, so sometimes we call them by the same name. But make no mistake, this one here is going to be led by Trevor.
And by we, she means Tasha. And that's okay. She can call me whatever she wants. Thank you, Tasha. Good afternoon. Appreciate the opportunity to give everyone a brief update on the current Washington Street realignment project. Before we get into the current status of the project, I'll give you just a quick background and the purpose of why we're actually rebuilding this roadway. So as Tasha had already mentioned, this was a voter-approved bond project back in 2019, and this is a safety-driven project. So as you can see in the picture there on the right, this road actually parallels a pretty significant cut slope that's located between the roadway and the railroad. And so over the years, there's been some slope stabilization issues with that slope that have undermined portions of the road and the existing guardrail along Washington Street. So with that, this project is actually going to shift the road approximately 10 feet on average to the north, which for reference is toward Penn Griffin School, away from the railroad. And then the railroad will actually be able to follow with a separate project of their own that would stabilize that slope and get rid of that safety issue. The contract was awarded to Banker Underground Incorporated, which is a local contractor out of Kernersville, by City Council on August the 7th of last year for just under $3 million. And here's a couple of pictures just to show you current conditions and what you would expect to see, hopefully just a couple of years from now. So the picture on the left is a current slope issue along Washington Street. This is taken from the pedestrian bridge looking westbound towards, you can see Mount Zion Baptist Church there in the background. So there are some areas there in particular that are undermining portions of concrete slab that are under that guardrail. So they haven't necessarily impacted the roadway yet, but we know that with time that would happen. So that was the urgency for this project. The NCR slope stabilization that's shown on the right-hand side is taken from Broad Street. You can see Showplace there in the background. That's an example of what we would expect to see happen once the railroad follows suit with their own project in that area. So we've touched on background and purpose. Let's talk about the project scope. The good thing here is you're going to see a lot of new. So there's new asphalt roadway, curb and gutter, and sidewalk. The sidewalk will only be located on the northern portion of the street, again on the school side of the street, not between the road and the slope for obvious reasons. We want to keep pedestrians away from that slope. The new water and sewer utilities that are going in are actually replacing old water lines that date back to 1902, sewer lines from 1910. So they've had a good service life, but it's time for an upgrade. Stormwater utilities and guardrail are also being replaced along the project. And this covers the area from Washington Street project to just east of the Downing Street intersection. And then you'll also see here where we're going to put in a raised pedestrian crosswalk. And this is located, you can see here in this picture, this is a picture taken from our design plans. And that raised crosswalk is actually going to be located there at the end of where the pedestrian bridge that spans the railroad and goes across the street to Penn Griffin School. So great placement there for pedestrian access, but I think that we'll also see some dual purpose there for some traffic calming since it will be raised. Because of the limited space that we have to actually rebuild this road, it forced us to implement some pretty extensive traffic control and detour plans. So anybody that's been through there, you'll see this picture on the right is actually the image that greets you as you drive to the project. So there's an eastbound one-way traffic pattern that's currently implemented throughout the project limits through the duration of the project. And the reason for that is you essentially have to build one side of the project, one lane of that, and all the utilities within that, shift traffic, and then close the other side. So this actually allowed us to build the project in a more timely and efficient manner. We know that it's a big impact traffic-wise, but it will deliver that project to that community in a shorter period of time. Local traffic within the project limits, the school, the residents, the businesses, they always have 24/7 access. Anytime that we're impacting their driveways, we schedule that with them well in advance, but they do have that continuous access. They just have to follow that eastbound traffic pattern throughout the project. And then we encourage non-local traffic to bypass the project as a whole. So if you do not need to be on Washington Street between Centennial and Hoskins, we do have an off-site detour route, and that uses Hoskins, East MLK, and North Centennial Street. So for the current project status, I threw in a plug for our electric utilities department. This work was done in-house by them, and this was actually done well in advance of the project. So you see 100% there. I know that you wouldn't expect anything different, right? They were not any kind of delay for the project, unlike everyone else that's above ground. So I'll get into the picture on the right here in a second, but they had all their work done well in advance of the project beginning. So job well done to them. For the water line and the sewer line construction, those are at 90 and 50% respectively. Stormwater is also about halfway done, and then curb and gutter and sidewalk is about a quarter of the way. Of course, the roadway items will be towards the end of the project. That's usually the last thing. But you can see the picture on the right is a good snapshot of really where the project is now. And this is taken, again, directly in front of Penn Griffin School. So you can see that this is new sidewalk and new curb and gutter. The new poles that electric installed, they're on the left-hand side of that sidewalk. And then the poles on the right-hand side, they're not supposed to be there right now. Those are the private utilities that are still pending relocation to the new poles on the left-hand side of that sidewalk. So as soon as that's done, those poles that are currently in that widened portion of asphalt roadway, those will be taken out. So that is in process. We do have bi-weekly meetings with those utility owners to stay on top of making sure that they are pushing to get those approvals through the railroad and that work can get done in a timely manner. All that being said, the current completion date is June the 10th of this year, and we are on track to meet that date.
The power lines we're looking at, if I'm facing that way, that's the left side of the street?
Correct. The new lines are on the left-hand side, and the old lines are on the right-hand side. Yeah. So the new lines will be between the sidewalk and, in this case, Penn Griffin School. So anything that you see within asphalt there, those lines, that's going to come out of the ground.
And the old lines, if you go back to the old road, that was also on the left-hand side?
Yeah.
Correct.
So that's
Yes,
how
it
far
was.
it
So that gives you that kind of gives you a good idea of how much we're actually shifting this roadway. So yes, those current poles that are in that picture otherwise would have been outside of the roadway. But since we have shifted it, it is now within that. But of course, it's outside of the current travel lane. But yes, good question. And then also, as Tasha briefly touched on, we thought this was a good opportunity to talk about the undergrounding utilities project that we are currently looking at doing in the historic district. Since that was not done under the original scope from the project, that was back in that 2013-14 time period, we are currently in process with electric and engineering departments of identifying what is that route for the duct bank that is going to be installed, so that all the overhead utilities can occupy that duct bank and those poles can be taken out of the ground. So as you see here on this kind of screenshot from a street view, those poles that are currently existing, those will be taken out. Everything will go underground. It will achieve that streetscape that you see more so on a what will be along Quabain Avenue or on portions of Main Street, right?
Are you going to tear up the sidewalk again like you did in 2013?
We may have to take out portions, but we will try to save as much as we possibly can. Yes. We do know that there will be some impact to those businesses that, again, unfortunately, but we see this as a great opportunity, and the risk is
And your start and
outweighed by the
finish,
reward.
your start and finish point for that is what?
So currently, we're still identifying the alignment for that. We would hope to have a design in place by probably sometime summer of this year. With
I'm
that,
assuming you'd start at Centennial and go X.
correct, it would go from Centennial to Day Place. So,
It's primarily covering the historic district. I
Right.
think there's one other slide that shows the boundary that we're considering.
yeah, so with that, these are the project limits for the two projects that we're talking about right now. So the current project for the Washington Street realignment is there in yellow. That essentially goes from Washington Street Park to just east of Downing Street intersection. The undergrounding project would go from Centennial to Day Place, which is really a driveway entrance, right, for Penn Griffin School. So there is some overlap there of those two projects, but they will be on two different timelines. We will get Washington Street done and opened up with the current project before this one would actually begin. Along with the design, we also are going to have to do some underground utility exploration just to make sure that we can avoid conflicts with what is already in the ground, right? And then we're also going to have to factor in lead time for materials. So we're going to probably treat this a lot like we did with Quabain Avenue, where we have a contractor come in, put the duct bank in, and redo the roadway. We're not going to leave you with a patch job. We're actually going to redo the full roadway from Centennial to Day Place, full width. So it's not going to be half the new road with a duct bank. It's going to look like a clean slate. We're going to get it right this time.
What's kind of the timeline? It's designed in the summer, kind of gets started sometime in the fall. I mean, how long would it take?
Yeah. So we're still talking about project schedule, but we do know that there's some lead times for materials as well. So I would say that sometime calendar year 2024, we should be able to start this. I think that we would like to take advantage of the summer months when school is not in session to really limit the impact to them. They have been great to work with. The community in general has been great to work with throughout the current project. I can't say enough positive things about them. But I think that we want to try to limit the impact of them as much as we possibly can. So not make any promises that can be delivered in that short summer duration, but we do want to take better advantage of that if we can on the next round.
Other than
Yeah.
aesthetics, are there other advantages to undergrounding the lines?
So there's the aesthetic portion, but it also helps with pedestrian access. So obviously there's less impediment within the sidewalk, right? So you're going to have those decorative street lamps, but it does eliminate as many obstacles that are there. And then I think from a maintenance standpoint, there's a benefit there in that it is going to be a new utility for electric there, and then eliminate some of the hazards that come along with the overhead lines. So.
I know you mentioned figuring out for the duct banks, there's some underground stuff to consider. I'm thinking about that pipeline right there. I think there's a gas pipeline, if I'm not mistaken,
There
right
is.
on Washington Street. I know we've been navigating right-of-way issues and access with other owners of different easements and things. I don't know what it's like with gas, but do we anticipate that there could be a long lead time on getting their cooperation for us to make that happen?
What our plan is to avoid existing utility conflicts as much as we can. So what we will do is we will identify the horizontal alignment, right, left to right. We'll figure out that alignment first. And then based off of the depth of where that is, we can actually go out and we can dig test holes to see how deep are specific utilities in that area. And then the good thing about the duct bank is we can essentially do everything that we possibly can to avoid those utilities. It's much different than something like a sewer line where you have to worry about gravity, right? With the duct bank, it's not as much of a concern there. So we actually do have some options that otherwise we wouldn't have.
And it's not a situation in which we're having to get their permission on that, like with railroad.
It's in our right of way, it's in the city's right of way. So the good thing is this project is going to essentially be controlled by us within our own right of way, doing everything that we can to avoid what's already in the ground. We do think that there is an alignment that makes sense. Some of that may actually be removing and replacement within the same trench that some other things were abandoned with the previous project. So with that, we have some historical knowledge and as-bills that we can pull from and leverage that space as best as we can.
Do you have a confidence factor on that cost estimate, the $4 million?
I'm confident that's high. I believe that with the electric utility estimate, it was somewhere in the 2.5 to 3 range, which leaves $1 million for roadway resurfacing and any concrete work that needs to happen there. I think that $1 million buffer should be enough to get that done. Hopefully, with some savings realized in there, hopefully.
Trevor, could you, I'm sorry, Tim, go ahead. You good? Could you make that last slide, please? The discovery of the alignment in our right of way. What if there's a discovery that alignment is there any possibility that the discovery of the alignment in our right of way could cause any delays or cost changes or anything like that in terms of the direction of how this is supposed to flow, any conflicts or anything like that than typically what the design currently is?
As far as how it relates to the current Washington Street project? No, and the good thing is they'll be on 2 different time frames, but what you'll see essentially is, as you just envision driving through this corridor a few years from now, coming from Centennial Street, you'll drive through and all those poles, those utility poles, they wouldn't be there. Everything else would pretty much look as it does now, right? So you would have those storefronts, those businesses framing that roadway, and you would have that streetscape with the sidewalk on each side, the decorative street lamps, on-street parking as it was intended to be. But you wouldn't have those other utility poles there, right? So then, as you go through and you approach Day Place or Penn Griffin School, that's when you would actually see the transition from underground to overhead. So those new poles that electric has put in the ground on the left-hand side of the sidewalk, those will remain. The good thing there is you don't have the streetscape or the front of those buildings that frame that roadway. So it doesn't necessarily draw your eye in to focus on those utilities as it currently does in the historic district. So that's where it really makes sense. Let's focus on getting the historic district improved with the streetscape that it needs by getting rid of those utility poles, but these would remain above ground through the current project as it's being delivered.
I see all the positives to it, and we've been hearing a push for a lot of underground for a long time. What's the negative?
Cost.
Other than cost, I mean, I don't really know the negative. I think
How about
that-
future maintenance? Have we had enough underground long enough that when you have to go and attack a maintenance problem?
I would have to rely on Tyler for that answer, but
Okay.
I would think that that's probably not a concern.
Underground is typically, we used to use a scale of 10s. It's 10 times better looking, but it is 10 times harder to, and it's 10 times more reliable, but it's also 10 times harder to assess an issue. If we have an outage on our downtown system here in the CBD, it's tough to find sometimes, whereas on an overhead section, I can get that fixed and back on like that. So it's not gonna go out as much. It's gonna be a lot better looking, but if it does, typically our average duration is greater, but, and it's expensive. I mean, it is expensive, probably 10 times cost as well. I don't know if I said that.
Tyler, isn't the protection of the utility lines better underground, conduit boxes and things of that nature, to be able, so in terms of protecting it from the elements and potential damage, the protection design of it, is much better than overhead?
Oh, absolutely.
So you're saying you're spreading out the maintenance, you're gonna have longer periods where you're not having to access it like you are with above ground lines? So it's-
Potentially.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah, squirrels sometimes get those red lines.
Squirrel got the ones in our yard. We found a whole cemetery.
Cats like going in the underground.
Yeah.
Are there other kind of thoughts or questions that, information that council might like for staff to provide as part of this project? Is this something that you all would like for us to continue evaluating?
If you'll take some time, manager, to go into, I guess, potential funding sources for this, I think that's gonna be at the top of council's mind. If it's feasible for us to do it financially, I think we can see the upside on it. But if you could walk us through that, if you have the information today, or if it's something you wanna talk about in the coming meeting.
I'll let Eric chime in on that. We've had some conversations about our ability to be able to fund this out of our existing fund balance from electric. We feel like we would be able to comfortably handle that. This would not be using any of the proceeds that were a result of our asset sale. Before staff would recommend that we would do any projects that might pull out of those funds, we wanted to have an opportunity to have our financial advisor come on board and actually take a long-term look at our utility and be able to advise us of that. And we're kicking that project off this spring. But based on what we currently have in our fund balance, we thought we could comfortably handle the $4 million, and we realized that that was a high estimate that we had provided at the time. And if Eric, if there's some part of that I missed, please feel free to chime in from our discussions.
No need to chime
I think one, going back to the work that was done on Washington Street several years ago, I can recall the conversations from local residents and business owners who asked, why the city did the whole project and left the power lines up. And, there was a cost back then associated, I think, with that decision. And I think what makes me see this as an opportunity now, very similar to what we're doing in the stadium district, is that there's an ROI on this level of investment. If you've heard the news in terms of the work people are doing down on Washington Street, such as D-Up, who I know is here with us, D-Up, the Hub, you've got Mount Zion Baptist, you've got existing businesses, Becky's and Mary's Restaurant doing great work down there. And you've got the special initiative that Business High Point is doing, where they've got some money set aside to support businesses going into those buildings and helping to revitalize some of those buildings and get them activated. I think, it's government's role to try to create the environment and ecosystem that is conducive for business and residents to thrive. And I think this is one of those opportunities that if we can do it, it's the right leverage point that can have that considerable return on investment. So I'm excited to hear about this. Madam Manager, final question I think perhaps is, I know today we're getting an update, but at some point you're gonna come back to us for us to have to hear about it. I'm assuming it'll go through finance for consideration first.
Once staff has the opportunity to have the cost estimates where we feel like we were a little bit more comfortable with those, we would bring it back to Finance Committee at that time.
Okay, awesome. Any other questions from the board?
Got a quick one.
Yes.
So the change order, that's part of the consent agenda about the pipe, is that the kind of thing expected in these kinds of projects to discover things you didn't realize were there because they're 100 years old?
It happens when consultants design and not the city.
That was my question. I guess. Who didn't find what they found?
Yeah, so, it happens. It happens from time to time. It's definitely something that we try to avoid. Something of that magnitude, certainly we try to avoid. I can tell you that the cost for that, and for those who haven't heard that number, that $200,000 number, it's really based off of that utility line being 30 inches in diameter rather than what you would normally see is a 10 or a 12-inch main. So the larger the pipe, the more cost there's going to be. And it's a pretty specialized shutdown. So unfortunately, it's not a cheap operation. But in comparison to what we expected to see, we felt like it was a very reasonable cost from Baker Underground.
Yeah. Trevor, also, we appreciate, I realize we got excited talking about the underground wires, but also appreciate the actual realignment project and it being on time and all the great work happening there, and all the coordination between all the city departments and staff that's working on that project. For those who don't know, that was approved, if I'm not mistaken, was that back in 2019 as part of a bond that actually went to referendum. Taxpayers voted on, and it was important to ensure that we could do that as there was a safety element. So it's been good to see the collaboration, not just among city staff, but also with the railroad and that. Looks like we've got hopefully some good social capital that we can barter on for some future opportunities with the railroad. Hope railroad's listening to that. Any other questions or observations from council? Want to welcome council members Johnson and Peters. Appreciate you all being here. Any questions from council for staff? Okay. Well, we appreciate you. Thank you, Trevor. Thank you, Madam Manager. Next item we have is a presentation from our electric department. And just as Tyler Barrier's coming up for that, want to echo a point we said before. As council heads into our retreat to strategically plan for the years and also to get ready for budget, it's important, as best as we can, to have overviews of some departments doing incredible work. And as we were trying to figure out who we'd have come in, it was unanimous that we should hear from Tyler, because we think Tyler is the best person to hear from. Obviously, 100%, right? Tyler? He also happens to be a part of the best class ever in Leadership High Point. So.
That's class
Listen, I'm not trying to start anything.
Yeah, Brian's done that one too. Well, thank you for your time today. My name's Tyler Barrier. I'm your Electric Utilities Director. Kind of like Trevor, I'm an engineer by trade. I'm in my 19th year of public service. I'm not a real flashy guy. I don't have a lot of stuff I can't sell you. I'm not a great salesman, but we can keep this as informal as possible. You won't see me sweat to death up here. I don't like when I just read slides, so you guys can read that for yourselves, and I'll just tell you. One thing that the mayor and I were joking about out in the hall. We're often compared to Greensboro, Winston-Salem because of the proximity there. Electric is unique to High Point. If you're in Greensboro, Winston-Salem, Charlotte, Raleigh, you're going to hear from departments like Parks and Rec or Police, Fire. Every city has that. You're unique because High Point has an electric utility, and none of those others have. There's over 90 cities in North Carolina that have an electric department. We're the biggest in the West as an Electric Cities member, and I'll get to more about Electric Cities later. Our budget's approximately $135 million a year. I know that sounds like a lot, but a lot of that is our wholesale power purchase. We do operate 14 substations, and talking about the overhead underground mileage of lines. We've got about 800 miles of infrastructure in our grid, and about half of that is already underground. So in comparison to other utilities, we're way ahead when it comes to that percentage. Just a timeline of public power, a little bit of history. We're one of the first in North Carolina to have an electric utility. We date back to 1893. That's the first time that you saw, and that was done for streetlights. There's a little bit about that later, but you see the timeline here. Some legislature stuff in the 30s and 60s, trying to protect the cities and the city's right to serve their citizens. Electric Cities, which we're a member of, formed in 1965, and like I said, there's over 90 cities that are still members today. 40 streetlights. That's why we started. The city wanted to be, High Point wanted to be the first city to provide free street lighting to its citizens. So it wanted to light those 40 street lights back in 1893. Today, we've got over 27,000 street lights, which is a little bit of improvement. But our growth, last year we had about, that says 248,000 kilowatts, or KW for demand. We're down a little bit, but that's only because of efficiencies that have been built into buildings and things in the last few years. So advantages to owning your system. You're probably sitting here thinking, okay, if Greensboro and Winston don't have it, why don't we just sell it to somebody? There's a ton of advantages to having your own electric system. These here, but also, just like the project that Trevor was talking about earlier, if you all decided you wanted to do a section of underground on Washington Street, I can tell you that that coordination effort with Duke Energy would not happen. This is not a presentation of Ash Duke, and I'm not here to throw mud at anybody, but if you all set a budget, you all set a timeline, staff can do that with with you having an in-house electric department. If you start that conversation with Duke today, good luck in getting it done in 10 years. So it's real measurable control that you have at your fingertips because you have your own electric department. Another thing, again, not throwing mud at Duke, but Duke is they're an IOU, investor owned, so they're answering to the shareholder and to the CEO. Our shareholders are our citizens and our customers. So that's one thing an advantage that we have internally is we're completely High Point focused. If we have a big storm coming up, ice storm, or you see a hurricane coming next year, and all the news outlets will be around asking everybody, what are you doing to prepare for the storm? And my answer is always, well, if you stay prepared, you don't have to get prepared. But another advantage we have is we're High Point focused. So if something does happen, there's a natural disaster, we're here serving our citizens first. Whereas other utilities, whether it's a co-op or investor owned, they're taking more of a statewide or regional approach about outage restorations or rates or whatever that may be. And our focus is High Point. If you'll recall, I've got to sell us. If you'll recall, back in like 17, 18, there were a couple of hurricanes that came through, Hurricane Florence and Hurricane Michael. We were 100% completed with our restoration effort and back on before Greensboro had even begun to be assessed by Duke. And if you'll remember, Nancy Vaughn was on News 2 saying, Duke, we need your help. And the current manager at the time was calling saying, where are we? We're 100%, we're good. And it's one of those feathers in our cap that we can do with that High Point focus that we have. We're not looking at what are the impacts in Virginia and do we need to shift resources. We're either bringing resources here, or if we have no issues, we're going to help our brother and sister utilities. So I mentioned Electric Cities. Electric Cities formed in 1965. There's a few things you'll hear some terms over just about City Hall. There's an agency one member. So there's a Western agency and an Eastern agency, but we're all Electric Cities members. We're a member of the West. We're one of the original 19 that bought into Catawba Nuclear Power Plant. So your energy here is 98% carbon-free nuclear energy. We do have members in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia, and our partnership with Electric Cities, we promote public power and all the things, all the benefits that come along with public power. This is a membership map here. Like I mentioned, the green dots, I know this map is really small, but you can get a copy of this presentation. Our Western agencies, there's 19. Those are in blue, and the green dots are Eastern agency, and there's other red dots are non-agency members. So those are members that are public power entities, but they pay to be a member of Electric Cities to receive those services that are provided by the partnership. The asset sale. So, you probably heard last, I think it was the October, November timeframe, the agency approached us about, they had an offer from Central Electric Co-op in South Carolina. So, typically, in a power plant, we own 75% of reactor 2 of Catawba Power Plant. And that represents about 832 megawatts of capacity. So that's what we as a partnership own, is that capacity. We have the rights to that energy that's generated at the plant. As some of you that have been on council saw by the presentations there, our base load as an agency was below that 832 megawatt capacity load. So in times of low demand, such as, a 60, 70 degree day, the sun's out, your air's not on, your heat's not on, you're not using a lot of energy, selling energy on the open market's pretty cheap. It's supply and demand. If we're not using a lot of energy, we've got excess to sell, you're not getting a lot out of that open market energy sale, maybe 2 cents a kilowatt hour. By transferring 18% of that energy or that capacity and selling it to the outside organization, we were able to lock in a much higher surplus energy sale rate of around 5 or 6 cents. And that's a lot more than you would get on an open market in a time of low demand. And that has great wholesale implications for our future wholesale rates as well. Rate stabilization fund. So the big thing here is that $41 million. So you'll see that this fund was set aside a long time ago so that what we can do, we can control our rates. Like I said, owning a nuclear power plant, there's a ton of stuff that, contingencies there and things that we may need later on. This rate stay fund will allow us to level out our rates in the event that something does go wrong. Let's say inflation, for example, inflation's high and stays high. Instead of passing on increased costs to our customer base, we can use that rate stabilization fund to mitigate some of those costs. Also, being a partial owner in the plant, if the plant operator, Electric Cities comes up and says, hey, plant budgets went over this year, we're going to have to pass on a 5% wholesale increase to every city. Well, instead of us passing that on to our customers, we can level that out with our rate stabilization fund. So that provides us some flexibility. Also, 41 million seems like a lot of money, but if you'll think about our first slide, when your budget is $135 million, our wholesale power costs may be $7, $8 million a month. So when you talk about what your monthly power bill is for an entire city from a wholesale side, it's not as much as you think. So this is where it all begins. This is Catawba Nuclear Plant. I think this is a stock photo. I don't believe this is Catawba, but we do own one reactor there. So we talked about all that. Energy leaves the plant, is transmitted over across country lines to 4 different delivery points that we have here in the city. Those 4 points are West End, North. West End is over off of Phillips Avenue. I don't know if you guys, Phillips Avenue off of Westchester. North is on Bear Road. Jackson Lake is obviously on Jackson Lake Road, very creative naming. And then there's Linden McCaslin, which is down on College Drive. Our distribution voltage here for all the nerds in the room is 12,470. And this is a picture of our current power grid. Each one of those is a substation, and green lines are our primary distribution lines.
Isn't there a certain part of the city that is not a public utility within the city limits? It's not 100% coverage, is it?
No, we don't serve every customer in the city limits. We do have most of them, but there are some folks like Mr. Brett Moore here who is a Duke customer. And we even
Call him
had,
out, why don't you?
he raised his hand, he volunteered, and there is some Energy United that kind of sneaks up around the development, Galmore Dairy Road, where engineering's doing some work up that way. Boylston.
Southwest High School is half and half.
Boylston Road.
So it's in the northern part of the city, in other words.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and Duke really is kind of intermingled with us everywhere. There's some Duke in the south part of town, there's some Duke up on the north end of town. It's most of our core city, and there's a map I can send you all if you'd like to see it, but our core city area here is really a customer choice area. If Duke and us are available, and you're gonna develop a new site from scratch and you're in that area, you can choose us or Duke. Now, the good thing there is that, again, I'm not throwing mud at Duke, but we beat them on almost everything. Reliability, outage restoration, we can beat them on rate. Duke has recently had a retail rate increase. I know, was it last November? The Utility Commission approved a rate increase for Duke, so I ran a bill comparison actually this morning, just in case that question was asked, but the average usage of a High Point customer is between 800 and 900 kilowatt hours, so that represents a bill that's about $110 for an average home. That same bill for a Duke customer is about $127, so it's about $17 less if you're a residential High Point customer versus a residential Duke customer. So all those customer choice areas, we're able to, from an economic development standpoint, come in. We mark it being a lot easier to work with. My phone number is on the website. You can call, ask questions about development. How does this look? What do we do here? Whereas, Duke doesn't have that reputation to be that forthcoming and that easy to work with. So.
Not to throw mud at them or anything.
Just some quick substation looks here. That's an Eastchester sub. I put this in here because that's one of our biggest subs as far as the amount of people it serves. Our newest substation, Hammer Substation, is right behind Eastchester on Dayton Street. Placement was mainly because we were trying to alleviate some of the higher demand on that Eastchester sub. One other reason I put this in here is I did want to toot our horn a little bit. High Point not only is one of the few that has its own electric utility, but we're one of the only ones that build our own substations. So when you see me come up to Finance Committee to get something on consent agenda, a lot of times I'm buying transformers, I'm buying wire, I'm buying substation relays, communication equipment, so that we can build a station ourselves. When I talk to our partners down in Concord or other electric utilities, Lexington, they're looking at our average cost for substation. They're like, how did you guys build that for like $3 million? Well, we did it ourselves. We're just buying material, and our internal folks are doing it. We have a really high technically competent staff that's able to get in here and do a lot of this work ourselves. That way we can try to keep those costs down.
Who has to sign off on your work as you're building that? Is that internal? You can sign off on your own work, or is there an outside agency that has to come and inspect?
No, so we don't fall under the same, so like your home, let's say you build a home and you've got to come up and get an electrical inspection. Those are two different code books. We fall under the NEC, National Electric Code. They fall under NEC. We fall under the NESC, which is the National Electric Safety Code. We don't have an outside entity that comes in and inspects our stuff. We do have a third-party consultant that will come in and double-check relay settings and double-check everything we do and do some design work for us. But we also are not subject to the Utility Commission as well. So that goes for that and like rate increases. Like I mentioned with Duke, they'll go to the utility commission and say, we need 15%, and the utility commission will say, well, you're getting 8. That's not the case with having that electric utility in-house. But as I mentioned, we're a full circle utility. We do overhead work, underground work, service, substations. And then another important note is that we are unique in the fact that we have an electric utility, but we also do have all of these different divisions within electric. There are some like, I think Pineville and Albemarle, they don't have substations, so they take delivery at a distribution voltage of 12,470, so they don't have a substations group. But they have to pay contracts to others to do that, and we have all that in-house. As a member of council, you'll probably hear from your constituents at some point, just giving you a heads up. We do a lot of tree work as far as tree maintenance and trimming trees. It's one of the ugly parts of owning a utility, but it's a very necessary part as well. I try to look at it and say, we as a organization gather a lot of data. We use this data for what? Every year, when I look at our calls of outage at the end of the year, a lot of times, number one is tree conflicts. So if we're not using that data to be proactive to mitigate future outages, we're not doing our job. But like I said, it is a necessary evil as owning a part of the utility. Just some more information in reference to tree trimming, why we do it. Causes of outage, like I mentioned, trees, natural weather related outages, rain, flooding, vehicles with operators under the influence of Jack Daniels, other reasons of outage are all here. But like I said, the good news is we are High Point focused. So if there are outages caused by these weather-related things or natural disasters, then we're here first. Now, we are members of an APPA emergency assistance program where we will go out of town a lot. You'll see some of our social media where we have folks that will go out of town, go to all over the East Coast, West Coast, wherever we need to go to help out our brothers and sisters. A few years ago, we had a crew spend a month in Houma, Louisiana. We've been to Tennessee, we've been to New York, we've been to Florida, all in the last few years. So we do a lot of emergency assistance work with others that need us.
And we do that on a voluntary basis?
So a lot of times when there's a natural disaster, let's say something's coming through here, we may ask for help to stage here, and if it's not going to impact us, we'll put our name out there and say, look, this storm shifted to the west, High Point won't have impacts, but as soon as the storm's through, we've got crews available if you have a need. We may be asked, we may not. That's just part of our APPA agreement where they start staging crews. It's always better to be the visiting team when you're talking about emergency assistance, but when we do send folks, they pay the bill for that, so it does offset some of our personnel cost. If those folks are out doing work in other cities, we're tracking their time, their equipment, the materials, and then we're reimbursed for that.
Tyler, on the tree trimming, first of all, thank you for being so proactive. I know along West Lexington and then Westchester, y'all did some significant tree trimming, and thank you. That's going to benefit us largely. But also on the tree trimming, what is our protocol for if there's a tree in a person's yard and there's an electrical wire and it needs to be trimmed? Do we notify them and give them an opportunity to trim the tree to our specifications, or how does that work?
So the good thing is, we do make an effort to contact every customer that we're gonna impact. Now, if it's just a line like it is down in Westchester, it's not a developed piece of property, you know, we don't go to the tax records and try to find who owns that if there's not a house there. But we do have employees, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Charles Collier. We have, again, a very unique individual that's been with us for 56 years, named Charlie Collier, that is in charge of these crews, and they will go to homes ahead of the trimming. And we also have started using some technology for that through IVR. So if we're gonna be in your area, I can do a reverse call and say, over the next 3 weeks, we're gonna be trimming in this area. If you have questions, contact this number. And those are some things that we're trying to eliminate, some manual touch points where people have to pick up the phone and call us. We're getting ready to implement some things for outages to where you, through a company called Text Power, where they can do some of these reportings through text. We've recently implemented an app for streetlights to where you can drive by and say, well, that streetlight's out. Pull your app up, zoom into your Google map, touch it, say out, and it'll dispatch a work order to the employee that's in charge of that area so they know the next day it's out. We're trying to use some of those technologies to be a better communicator out in front of some of these operations. But yes, we do contact folks if it's an ornamental tree or it's an area we can tell that's being maintained. We won't just go in there and butcher it without that. And really, I'm kind of getting close to the end. I'm happy to answer any questions. These are some of our top customers in the city. Some names you'll recognize. HPU, High Point Regional, Fatessa, Thomas Bus, Cal. These are some highlights for our CIP. So you guys are embarking on the budget process here, not too far off. You'll see some of these projects. Our CIP is aimed at some projects that are larger scale and are usually multi-year projects. You'll hear a lot about AMI. I mentioned getting rid of some manual touch points and having better data. AMI is going to allow us to do that. That's a big project coming down the line. And there's some things that we're going to always do. Perpetual maintenance, substation renovation. If you're going to own that infrastructure, you're going to have to maintain it. It's just a matter of at what level you're maintaining it. An electric operations facility, and just some other CIP items there. And that's really all I've got. I'm happy to answer any questions or answer anything, concerns you all have.
Are there any questions for staff from council?
So the debt that's owed on the power station, when's that supposed to be paid off? Okay. I mean, I know that it's supposed to have been paid off a long time ago, and there's been, I guess, cost overrun initially, and then refinancing.
Somebody share with them the timeline on when it was supposed to be, and then we had to help out some other sister agencies that didn't quite manage as well as we did. And so it extended the mortgage out from where it should be. I don't have all the specific numbers in the back of my head and dates, but if somebody in here does.
So the debt will be satisfied in 2032. We are not debt-free, but after the asset sale, we are holding, at the agency level, dollars that will kind of simulate being debt-free. Basically, you can't pay off the debt early, but you've got the money to pay it if you need it. And what that asset sale did was offset the debt payments that we'll make to that. Now, what the current is, I don't have that right in front of me.
That's very helpful, thank you.
A couple other things on that, just to Brent's point, I believe it was 2016 when Electricities refinanced some debt, which extended those payments out to 2032. And so everybody's clear, the city of High Point has no debt on its system and infrastructure. It's all Electricities on the power plant. So,
And High Point at that time did vote no on that refinance and was overruled.
it was 18-1.
So, it was kind of one of those things where an immediate refinance meant a cash out to some cities, and their leadership felt like that cash on hand right then was better for them than paying off a debt early. And we were in good enough shape financially, we did not vote for that, but
Thank you.
here we are.
Any other questions? Tyler, thank you so much for this overview. It's very helpful, and I know that we'll have more overviews in the months to come. With that, we're actually have a closed session item for attorney-client privilege. Can I have a motion to go into closed session?
So move.
We have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem and a second by Councilmember Moore. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any against? That motion passes. And at the light.
Any motions on
to
that?
adjourn.
Motion to adjourn by Mayor Pro Tem, second by Councilwoman Cook. Any discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any against? And special meeting is adjourned.